Croeso, this is James, aka JP Harker, coming to you with another video. This one, it's going to be two books, and they're both from the 40k or 30k universe. So if you're not into that or not into a bit of sci-fi, I'm not going to say don't watch my videos, but this may not be for you. It's these two, Damnation of Pythos and Nemesis. So the Damnation of Pythos is by David Annandale, and Nemesis is by James Swallow. They're both Horus Heresy books. So let's start with the Damnation of Pythos. This follows a group of loyalist legions, or loyalist legionaries, who have escaped from the betrayal at Istvan. And we have members of the Raven Guard, the Salamanders, and the Iron Hands. And they have all made their way to this planet of Pythos. The Iron Hands in particular are in very bad shape, because even though they make up the majority of the people here, they've just lost their Primarch, and it's a big deal. Now, something I rather liked was we have this conflict in between them, which is neither the big violent conflict of the heresy, but it's not the we're all in this together brothers either. It's words almost coming to blows over their difference of opinion and the grief that is going through them. And I liked that. I thought that was interesting. We still had that thing where the Salamanders are the only morally sound people, but apart from that, it was good. Now, as far as the action goes, it's Space Marine action, it's bolters, it's chainsaws, but it was good. It was less of the marine on marine stuff, and it was Marines versus these jungle monsters for a lot of it, who they sensibly realized could not be logical carnivores because of their size, and there was some good sense in that. And the beginning reminded me a little bit of the Megarachnids on Murder that we had in the original trilogy of Horus Heresy, so that was quite good. Something that was both good and potentially bad is this is a very small, isolated scenario. Now, that's a good thing in one way, because we don't all know how it's going to end. For the most part, the Horus Heresy, it's a big prequel to the 40k universe. We already know how an awful lot of this is going to end up. But little books like this, where it's a small, isolated group, I don't know who's going to make it out. I don't know if Pythos will be completely destroyed or saved. And that's good. The bad part is, and this is a generally bad issue with the Horus Heresy books, is it doesn't advance the greater plot. Now, I'm contradicting myself there by saying, oh, it's good that it's small and isolated. It is, it makes for a good individual book, but once you've finished it, and you're looking at the next book in the series, you realize, I didn't need to read this. This hasn't advanced the situation at all. So, a double-edged sword, a mixed blessing there, as far as that goes. Now, we have the moral debate in here about misguided civilians. We have the different ways that different legions approach things and see things, and that's all very interesting. But for all its good points, I found it only okay. I thought, well, it's all right. It's not a bad book. Don't regret the time spent reading it. But it's not one I'm planning on going back to, and it's not one where I'd say to a fan of the heresy, oh, you must read this one. No, read it if you want, but it's a middling one, and there's lots of middling books out there, so it's not going to rip into it, not going to praise it either. Now, Nemesis, I very nearly gave this a bad review, and I very nearly marked this down, and I shall explain why in a moment. Nemesis, despite the slightly misleading prologue with Erebus, this isn't about Space Marines particularly. It's about a team of assassins from the various different temples being sent on a mission to assassinate Horus. And meanwhile, we find there's another rival assassin who's up to no good. And it's the idea of this is the secret war. This is not the battles. This is the sneaky stuff that everyone's doing in the background. Now that's a really good idea, but for a big chunk of the beginning, I thought I'm going to be slating this because it took a long time to assemble the team. We've all seen Ocean's 11. We all know you have to introduce each team member and become invested in each team member. I get that. But it took longer than I would have liked. And the subplot, while it is important to the main plot, we don't really appreciate how important it is until much later. And initially, that subplot, I just think, it's all right. Can we get back to the assassins now? Well, there's a bit of that going. It's a remembrancer syndrome in a lot of the other books. I see remembrancers and I think, oh, come on, just get back to the good stuff. There was a little of that going on here. But once we got going, this assassin team was interesting because they do not like one another. They don't want to be working together. There's a reason different temples don't tend to do that. And when we come to the book's climax especially, it's brilliant because it's rewarding. We have exactly what we wanted to see. We have each temple's speciality doing what it does best. We have our shapeshifter cleverly finding a way to shapeshift. We have our Eversaw ripping indestructibly through stuff. We have our Vindicare doing his perfect marksmanship. It really works well. The payoff is worth that slow start, I think. The only thing that it almost tipped this back down again, but it overall is good, is Rogel Dawn. Now again, I understand. The Primarch of the Imperial Fists is not a man noted for his imagination. I get it. But his disapproval of the assassination plan makes no sense at all. I could understand if he said, I don't approve of sending assassins because Horus is my brother and he should fall by the hand of one of his brothers. Or, I don't approve of clandestine warfare at all. I'd understand those. I'd think, simplistic view, but it makes sense. It suits his character. I don't like that he tries to have a clever reason, and that clever reason makes no sense. Because he says, if we assassinate Horus, then there'll be a power vacuum, and we won't know what's happening next, and it will be chaotic. And I couldn't help but think, no, it won't. Or to be more precise, it'll definitely be a better situation than you're in now, because it's not as if Horus is predictable. Yes, we know he's heading for Earth eventually, for Terra, sorry, but the way he's orchestrated this rebellion and the way he's playing it is clever. He's not an obvious man doing obvious things. So keeping him in position because we can then predict the enemy's movements is nonsense. The idea that, well, someone else will take his place is also a nonsense. I mean, I know that for a fact from the later 40k things, but Dawn must know that none of the other Primarchs are Horus's equal as strategists. People like Abaddon and Erebus aren't Horus's equal combatively. So getting rid of Horus and leaving it to a chaos of smaller warbands or to another leader, that's a really good thing for the Imperium. Scattered warbands can be attacked and destroyed piecemeal. Another leader will not be as good as Horus is. Assassinating him is the absolute most logical plan. And Dawn is saying it as if this is a reasonable counter-argument, and it isn't. It makes no sense. I'd have been far happier if he'd just said, this isn't work for honest soldiers. I'd have gone with that. But no, trying to put logic into it doesn't work. Assassinate Horus, it's the only way. So I went on a bit of a rant because I got very annoyed when I read that bit. Overall, it's a pretty good book. So, I shall hold these up now and cease my ranting. Damnation of Pythos and Nemesis, both alright. I'd say this one a little bit ahead, because this one, nice, it's not bad, it's alright, but this one, it's worth the slow start for the payoff we get in sort of the last act. So that's going to be my recommendation there. Okay. That's it for this video, I believe, so I shall leave it there. This is James, aka JP Harker. World out.